He was just sitting on a park bench, reading a book. Calm, quiet. But to one police officer, that was enough to make him a suspect. What the officer didn't know is that the man he just arrested wasn't just any man. He was one of the most respected federal agents in the country. And this mistake? It was about to change everything. Leon Carter sat quietly on a weathered park bench beneath the soft afternoon sun, a book resting in his hands, half read but fully absorbing his attention. The gentle rustling of leaves above, the distant laughter of children playing, and the occasional bark of a dog created the kind of background noise that didn't distract but rather soothed. For Leon, this park wasn't just a place to pass time. It was a small sanctuary. After years in a career filled with pressure, decisions, and danger, these moments of peace were rare and sacred. He wore a simple gray hoodie, worn jeans, nothing flashy. He blended in, but that was the point. To sit, breathe, and, for a while, not have to carry the weight of who he was outside of this quiet space. He wasn't thinking about threats, or targets, or the people he'd put behind bars. He was just present. Until the feeling came. That familiar tingle, like being watched, and even before he looked up, he knew what he'd see. Someone watching, someone judging, and once again his peace was already slipping away. Just a few steps away, Officer Rick Dalton continued his routine patrol through Central Ridge Park, his boots pressing into the gravel path with practiced rhythm. After more than 2 decades on the force, this park felt like his territory. Familiar, predictable, even personal. He prided himself on knowing every corner, every regular face, every subtle change. So when he noticed a man he didn't recognize, a black man sitting alone reading, calm, something in his gut tightened. It wasn't what the man was doing that caught Rick's attention, but rather what he wasn't doing. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't look out of place. But somehow, to Rick, he felt out of place. Rick slowed down, narrowing his eyes behind his sunglasses, and stared just a little longer than necessary. The man, dressed casually, seemed too at ease, too settled, as if he belonged there, and to Rick, that felt suspicious. Earlier in the week, a vague suspect description had circulated through the department. Black male, medium build, early 40s, possibly armed, last seen near a shopping plaza several miles away. No photo, no clear identifiers, just words and enough ambiguity to justify a feeling Rick couldn't shake. Never seen him before, he muttered to himself, hand instinctively brushing his baton. He didn't need a crime, he just needed a reason, and maybe, in his mind, he already had one. Rick Dalton adjusted his duty belt and took a slow breath before stepping off the gravel path toward the bench. His strides were firm but tense, each step fueled more by instinct than reason. His hand hovered close to his holster, not out of immediate threat, but out of a habit that revealed more about his mindset than he realized. Leon Carter noticed the movement even before Rick spoke. He closed his book calmly, slid his finger between the pages to mark his spot, and rested it on his lap with both hands visible. He knew exactly how this went. He had seen it before, lived it before. The approach was always the same. Slow, calculated, backed by suspicion, not evidence. Rick stopped just a few feet away, his shadow falling over Leon. "Afternoon," he said, his voice polite on the surface but lined with something harder. "Afternoon," Leon replied, tone even, unreadable. Rick scanned him up and down, eyes flicking from his face to the closed book. "What brings you out here today?" he asked. "Just enjoying the park," Leon replied smoothly. "Nice day?" Rick gave a tight nod, but the words didn't reassure him. Something still felt off, only it wasn't Leon, it was his own inability to control the situation. "You from around here?" he asked next, fishing. "I've been around," Leon said with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. The answer was vague, and that was enough to set Rick on edge. "Mind if I see some ID?" he asked, more forcefully now. That was the moment, the line drawn. Leon's expression didn't change, but there was a new weight behind his voice as he responded. "Am I under arrest?" Rick stiffened. The calmness in Leon's voice made him feel like he was the one being judged. You will be if you don't cooperate, Rick shot back, his hand now hovering a little closer to his weapon. Leon inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had choices, but all of them carried consequences. I'm sitting in a park, he said. Is that against the law? Rick's jaw tensed. You fit the description of someone we're looking for. It was a weak justification, and even Rick knew it. But now, it wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about control, and he was losing it. The tension between them was thick enough to cut. Rick Dalton took one more step forward, his patience worn thin, his authority now rooted more in emotion than logic. Don't get smart with me. Show me your ID, now. His tone wasn't asking, it was demanding. Leon Carter stayed seated, his posture composed, his voice unwavering. If I'm not under arrest, I don't have to. The sentence was calm, but its weight hit hard. Rick didn't like it. He didn't like the tone, the confidence, the refusal to fold. This man didn't act like someone afraid of being detained, and that made Rick feel like he was losing control of the situation. Stand up, he ordered, stepping back just enough to give space, not for respect, but for the next move. Leon exhaled quietly. He had no reason to submit, no crime, no warrant. But he knew this game. He'd seen what happened to people who tried to argue logic with a badge and a gun. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, cautiously, deliberately, making sure every motion was visible. He pulled out his wallet, opened it, and extended his ID. Rick snatched it quickly, eyes flicking across the name, but it meant nothing to him. He had already made up his mind. Get up, he said again. Leon rose, slow and controlled, never breaking eye contact. Turn around. There was no more hesitation. Rick reached for the cuffs, locked them tightly around Leon's wrists with a click that echoed louder than it should have. Leon didn't resist, didn't speak. Around them, a few people in the park began to notice. A mother pushing a stroller paused, a jogger slowed down, but no one stepped in. No one ever did. Leon looked straight ahead as Rick gripped his arm and led him toward the squad car. His shoulders didn't sag, his head didn't hang, but inside something cracked. Not out of surprise, but out of exhaustion. Because this wasn't shocking. This wasn't new. Even in peace, even in stillness, even with nothing in his hands but a book, he was still seen as a threat. And now, walking in handcuffs, his only crime was existing in the wrong place, in the wrong skin, under the wrong gaze. The back seat of the patrol car was cold and rigid, built more for control than comfort. Leon Carter sat motionless, hands cuffed behind his back, shoulders square, eyes fixed out the window. The city passed by in fragments, trees giving way to sidewalks, playgrounds to gray walls. But Leon didn't see any of it. His mind was somewhere else. He had been in the back of a squad car before, but this time felt heavier, not because of the metal biting into his wrists, but because of the familiar weight pressing into his chest. The knowledge that none of his accomplishments, none of his integrity, none of his restraint could stop this from happening again, and again, and again. Up front, Officer Rick Dalton gripped the steering wheel like he was trying to crush it. His eyes stayed forward, jaw clenched so tight it ached. He had questions, none of which he dared to ask out loud. Why did the man in the back seat look so calm? Why did he feel like the one being watched? He glanced at the rearview mirror. Leon's eyes met his, still, unblinking, unshaken. What were you really doing in that park? Rick asked, breaking the silence with a question that sounded more like a defense than a demand. Reading, Leon replied evenly. Like I said, Rick scoffed under his breath. A guy like you? Just reading in a park? Leon raised one brow, voice still steady. A guy like me? The words landed like a brick. Rick didn't respond. He couldn't. He knew exactly what he meant, and he also knew he shouldn't have said it, but the silence between them was louder now, stretching long and uncomfortable. After a moment, Leon spoke again. Tell me, officer, what does a guy like me look like? Rick's grip tightened, his mouth opened, then closed. He had no answer. Only the growing awareness that something had gone wrong long before the cuffs ever closed, and that maybe, Just maybe, he was the reason why. The patrol car pulled into the precinct's rear lot as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement. Rick Dalton stepped out quickly, the routine motion of opening the back door feeling heavier than usual. Leon Carter emerged from the vehicle, calm as ever, hands still cuffed behind him, posture composed like a man walking into a meeting. Not a jail. The two walked through the back entrance, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. The station was alive with noise, phones ringing, reports being typed, radios crackling. But that all shifted the moment they walked in. Conversations slowed, heads turned. A subtle shift in energy ran through the room, almost like someone had opened a window and let in a draft no one expected. Rick didn't notice at first. He was too focused on justifying his own discomfort. But others did. At the booking desk, Officer Julian Reyes, young and sharp, looked up from his monitor. His gaze moved from Rick to Leon, and then froze. Only for a second, but long enough. Leon saw it, the recognition. A flicker in Reyes' eyes. He knew. And just as quickly, the young officer masked it, schooling his expression into neutral professionalism. Rick dropped the ID on the counter with a sigh. Suspicious activity in the park. Wouldn't identify himself. Reyes picked up the ID, read the name slowly, then set it back down. Captain Shaw's in her office. You should take him to her. Rick hesitated. Right now? Yeah, Reyes said, avoiding Leon's gaze this time. Now. Without another word, Rick took Leon by the arm and led him down the main corridor of the precinct. The further they walked, the quieter the room became. Leon remained silent, but the weight of the moment seemed to move with him, like everyone around could feel something shifting, even if they didn't understand what. They stopped at a door marked Captain Darlene Shaw, the gold letters catching a sliver of fading sunlight. Rick knocked. A beat passed, then a voice answered, firm and focused. Come in. Rick opened the door and led Leon inside. The office was organized, clean, nothing excessive. Captain Shaw looked up from her paperwork and paused. Her eyes met Leon's, and something in her gaze shifted. Recognition. She knew exactly who was standing in front of her. The name, the face, the presence. She recovered quickly, her expression sliding back into place. But the pause had already said enough. Rick cleared his throat. Caught him in the park, acting off. Didn't cooperate. Matched a general description. Shaw didn't look at Rick. Her attention stayed on Leon. And Leon, as always, stood tall. Unshaken. Calm. And now unmistakably known. As the door closed softly behind Officer Dalton, the room fell into a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt heavy. Captain Darlene Shaw stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Leon Carter, whose wrists were still cuffed, whose stance remained calm, and whose presence filled the space more than any words could. She walked around her desk with a kind of measured grace, stopping just a few feet in front of him. Mr. Carter, she said, not with doubt but with certainty. Leon nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, not superiority. Captain, he replied, quiet but clear. Shaw exhaled, her tone shifting. I want to apologize for how you've been handled. Leon didn't look away. His expression remained unchanged, but his voice carried something deeper, a tiredness born from repetition. It's not the first time. Shaw looked at the cuffs, then back at his eyes. May I ask why you didn't identify yourself from the beginning? Leon's answer came without hesitation. Because I shouldn't have to. Shaw didn't interrupt. She let the silence hang, respectful of what had just been said. You knew how this would go, she finally said. Leon gave the faintest of nods. And I wanted to see how far it would go, not because I doubted it, but because I expected it. Shaw folded her arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. You understand this puts me in a difficult position. Leon's gaze didn't waver. I'm not here to make it easier. I'm here to make it visible. That landed. Hard. Shaw didn't flinch, but the weight of his words was undeniable. She stepped back, considering. Then she reached for the intercom on her desk. "Send Officer Dalton back in," she said. Before releasing the button, she turned back to Leon, meeting his eyes with something more than protocol, something that resembled respect. "I'll take care of this, Mr. Carter," she said, "but I hope you understand, some changes take more than just paperwork." Leon gave her a look that said he already knew. "That's why I'm still standing here, Captain." And with that, they both understood something unspoken. What came next wasn't just about a mistaken arrest. It was about everything behind it. The door creaked open, and Rick Dalton stepped back into the room, his eyes shifting quickly from Captain Shaw to Leon Carter, then back again, as if trying to read what had just transpired in his absence. But something felt off. The room didn't feel like his anymore. The power that usually followed his badge didn't enter with him. Instead, it stayed outside, like it knew it wasn't welcome here. He cleared his throat, attempting to reassert control. "Captain, if I may explain—" "There's no need," Shaw cut in firmly, her voice calm but final. "Mr. Carter is not the man you were looking for." Rick blinked, once, twice, his mouth opened, then shut. "But he matched the description. A vague description," Shaw said, standing fully now, her tone colder than before. "And not nearly enough to justify the way you approached him." Rick shifted on his feet, trying to speak, but his arguments had already crumbled. He glanced at Leon, who stood exactly where he had been, unmoved, unbothered, uncuffed in presence even if not yet in body. "Release him," Shaw ordered. "Now." Rick hesitated, his hand hovering by the cuffs, as if somehow letting go would confirm everything he feared. His mistake, his failure, his bias. But he reached for the key. His fingers trembled. The metal clicked and the cuffs released. Leon didn't move right away. He simply looked at Rick, calm and unreadable. "Thank you," he said quietly, not as gratitude, but as closure. Rick didn't respond. He couldn't. For the first time in years, he felt truly out of place. In uniform, in the room, in his own skin, Captain Shaw turned toward him. "You may step outside, Officer Dalton." It wasn't a suggestion. Rick gave a faint nod, barely able to meet her eyes, then turned and walked out, the sound of the door clicking shut behind him louder than any siren he'd ever heard. And in that silence, it was clear. The badge didn't protect him from the truth. Not anymore. The fluorescent lights in the precinct's conference room buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow on the long table below. Rick Dalton sat stiffly at one end, still in uniform, though it suddenly felt like a costume, one that no longer fit. His palms were clammy, resting on his knees beneath the table, out of view. Across from him sat Captain Darlene Shaw, flanked by two internal affairs investigators, their faces unreadable, their folders closed but heavy with implication. At the far end of the table, sitting calmly with his hands folded, was Leon Carter. No cuffs, no accusation, just presence, quiet, certain. Rick couldn't look directly at him, not yet. The air was thick with something Rick hadn't felt in years, doubt. Captain Shaw spoke first, her voice steady and formal. "This session will document the incident that occurred in Central Ridge Park earlier this week involving Officer Dalton and Mr. Carter. The purpose is to assess conduct, procedure, and determine whether disciplinary action is warranted." Rick gave a mechanical nod, unsure whether to brace or breathe. One of the internal affairs officers leaned forward. "Officer Dalton, let's begin with your account. Why did you choose to approach Mr. Carter that day?" Rick paused. The answer used to come easy: suspicion, instinct, safety. But now none of those words felt right. "He matched the description of a suspect," Rick said slowly. I thought something felt off." The IA agent raised an eyebrow. "What exactly felt off?" Rick opened his mouth, closed it. He glanced at Leon for a split second. Leon didn't flinch. He was just sitting there, Rick said finally. Alone, calm. He didn't look concerned. "So being calm in a park was enough to raise suspicion?" the agent asked. Rick's throat tightened. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it," Shaw interjected. "Because right now it sounds simple. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting." Rick shifted in his seat. His badge felt heavier than ever. Across the table, Leon finally spoke. I didn't resist. I didn't hide anything. I told the truth, and I was still treated like a suspect. His voice was level, not bitter, just deliberate. What does that say about the system Officer Dalton represents? Rick looked up and for the first time truly saw Leon, not as a threat, not as a profile, but as a man who had every right to be angry and yet chose control. That look cut deeper than any accusation. Shaw leaned forward. We're not here to villainize. We're here to correct. But correction begins with honesty. Rick swallowed hard. The truth was no longer something he could dodge. It was sitting across the table, staring right at him. The precinct was quieter now. The hallway outside the conference room had emptied, but the tension from earlier still lingered in the walls. Captain Shaw stood by her office window, arms folded, staring out at the fading daylight without really seeing it. Behind her, the door opened softly. Leon Carter stepped in, calm and composed as always. Shaw didn't turn around. I figured you'd want to talk, she said. Leon stopped a few feet from her, his voice low but direct. I didn't come here for apologies or revenge. Shaw nodded slowly, still watching the sky change colors. I know. She turned to face him. But I still owe you both. An apology for what happened and a responsibility for what comes next. Leon didn't respond right away. He let the silence breathe. Then he said, the apology matters, but only if it leads somewhere. Shaw took a deep breath. We've started reviewing the department's use of force protocols, looking into more intensive training on bias, de-escalation, long-term accountability. This isn't something we can fix overnight, but it's not going back to the way it was. Leon studied her for a moment. Good, because if it does, I'll be back. There was no threat in his voice, only conviction. Shaw gave a tired smile. I wouldn't expect anything less. A beat passed. You could have ended this the moment he stopped you, she said. Flashed a badge, said who you were. That would have shut him down in seconds. Yes, Leon said quietly. But then it would have been about who I am, not what he did. Shaw nodded again, slower this time, like she finally understood the full weight of that choice. So what now? She asked. What do you want to happen next? Leon looked out the window now, at a city that looked peaceful from a distance, but held too many stories like his just beneath the surface. I want you to keep going. I want the next officer who sees someone like me to think before reaching for their holster, and I want someone in this building to know that silence can be complicity or courage. Shaw met his gaze, and in that moment there was no rank between them, just two people who had both seen too much and still believed change was possible. I hear you, Mr. Carter, she said softly, and I'm listening now. Rick Dalton sat alone at his desk, long after the precinct lights had dimmed and the last footsteps faded into silence. The hum of a vending machine down the hall was the only sound that reminded him the world hadn't stopped, but in his chest it had. His badge lay on the desk in front of him, not pinned to his chest where it used to feel like armor, but flat, exposed, cold. He stared at it like a stranger, like it belonged to someone else. The day had moved fast, but now everything moved slow. The room felt unfamiliar, even though he had walked it every day for years. The chair beneath him was the same, the desk, the walls, the smell of old coffee and printer ink. All the same, but he wasn't, and he knew it. Rick leaned back slightly, running a hand over his face, trying to shake off the weight that had settled on his shoulders, but it wouldn't go, not this time. For years he had believed he was a good cop, fair, tough maybe, but never unjust. He had written up reports, made arrests, followed instincts, but no one had ever asked him to question the instincts themselves. Until now. And now, they didn't feel like instincts anymore. They felt like shadows, unchecked, unexamined, and today those shadows had a name. Leon Carter. Rick had arrested a man who had done nothing wrong, who had been calm, clear, respectful, a man who could have destroyed him with a single word. but didn't, and that grace hurt more than any punishment, because it meant the system had failed, but Leon hadn't. Rick turned the badge over in his hand. The metal felt heavier than it ever had, not because it weighed more, but because it meant less. Or maybe it finally meant what it always should have: responsibility. The kind that doesn't end when the cuffs click. The kind that doesn't hide behind procedure. And as Rick sat there, alone in the quiet for the first time in 2 decades, he didn't know if he deserved to wear it again. 2 days later, the community center was filled with quiet attention. Not the kind born of spectacle, but the kind born of something real, something overdue. A few dozen people sat on folding chairs, lined up in rows beneath buzzing lights and old ceiling fans, their eyes fixed on the man standing calmly at the front. Leon Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence carried further than volume ever could. He stood behind a simple podium. No prepared notes, no entourage, just the truth. "I wasn't going to speak," he began. "Honestly, I didn't plan on saying anything at all, because I didn't think it would matter." He paused, scanning the room. Not for drama, but to let the weight settle. But then I realized silence is what lets things like this keep happening. A murmur of agreement ran through the room. "I was arrested," Leon continued. "Not for what I did, but for what I looked like. And it would have ended there, like it always does, except this time I decided to let it play out." He didn't say the officer's name. He didn't need to. This wasn't about one man. "I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm here because I want something better. For all of us. I want officers to be trained not just in tactics, but in truth. Not just in control, but in compassion." A young man in the crowd nodded slowly, eyes wide. An older woman clutched her purse tighter, as if holding back tears. "I was lucky," Leon said, his voice softer now. "I had the knowledge and the title to protect me. Most people don't. Most don't get a second chance to explain themselves in a conference room. Most get a record. Or worse. That silence again, deep, uncomfortable, necessary. So, I'm not staying silent anymore, and I'm asking you not to either." He let the words hang, then stepped back from the podium, letting the truth echo, no applause, just reflection, the kind that lingers longer than clapping ever could. The envelope sat on Rick Dalton's desk like a quiet sentence already passed. No red ink, no dramatic seals, just a plain white folder with his name printed on top, bold, clinical, in all caps. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't need to. He already knew what it said. Still, he stared at it like the words might change if he waited long enough. They didn't. A knock broke the silence. Captain Shaw stepped into the room, not with the force of a superior, but with the weight of someone who understood what came next wouldn't feel like justice to anyone. "Rick," she said simply. He stood, slow and heavy. "It's official?" "It is." She nodded. "Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave. Pending final review by the board, you'll be notified if it escalates." Rick didn't flinch. Maybe he had run out of reactions. "Is this where I get to defend myself again?" he asked, voice quiet. "No," Shaw replied, calm. "This is where you listen." A pause. "I know you didn't wake up that morning intending to do harm. I know you've given years of your life to this job. But intent doesn't erase outcome, and it doesn't excuse the pattern." Rick looked down at the folder. It was light, but it held everything. "What happens now?" Shaw stepped closer, eyes steady. "Now, you step away, reflect. You ask yourself why you reacted the way you did. Why your first instinct wasn't to ask, but to assume. Why silence from a man like Leon Carter made you reach for control." Rick's jaw clenched. "You think I'm a racist?" Shaw didn't answer immediately. "I think you've spent too many years confusing suspicion with instinct, and the system let you." That answer hung in the air like a final verdict. Rick didn't argue. He just nodded, because in his gut he knew she was right. "Will I be back?" he asked, not out of hope, just needing something clear in the fog. "That depends on who walks back through that door," she said, turning toward the hallway. Not in uniform, but in mindset. As she left, Rick sat down again, slowly, the folder unopened, the chair colder. He reached out, finally lifting the envelope. He opened it. Inside. Just paper. Just words. But they hit like weight, like mirror glass, and all it reflected was himself. Captain Darlin Shaw stood in her office once again, but this time, the weight she carried was different. Not guilt, not shame, but the burden of doing something real with the aftermath. She looked over the training reports, the updated procedures being drafted, the new oversight board forming, and she knew something was still missing. Insight, experience, perspective from outside the uniform. That's why Leon Carter sat across from her now, silent for the moment, hands folded, expression calm but curious. Shaw leaned forward, voice steady. I know you didn't ask for this. I know you're not looking for a spotlight. But after everything that's happened, I believe your voice needs to be part of what comes next. Leon didn't answer immediately. He studied her. Not the words, those came easy, but the intention behind them. You want me to help you fix the same system that nearly treated me like a threat for sitting in a park? Shaw didn't blink. Yes. Because you see the cracks, and because people like you are the ones we've left out of the conversation for too long. Leon looked away briefly, eyes catching the precinct bulletin board outside. Paper notices about change, about policy, about promise. I'm not here to make your department look better, he said. I won't sugarcoat anything. I don't want you to, Shaw replied. I want truth. I want the voices that never make it into the meeting rooms. A pause stretched between them. Not awkward, just careful. What would this role look like? Leon asked. You'd help revise our training curriculum, lead conversations with the incoming cadets, work with our internal ethics team, speak with the community on our behalf, but with your own words, not ours. Leon sat back in his chair, absorbing it all. And if I say no? Then we still move forward, Shaw said quietly, but we'll be missing the voice that challenged us the most. He looked at her, this time not with suspicion, but consideration. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. They shook hands, not as officer and citizen, but as two people trying to turn a fracture into a foundation. And in that moment, something shifted. Not fixed, not finished, but started. The sun was rising over the city, washing the skyline in soft gold as life began to stir again. A jogger passed the corner of Central Ridge Park. A bus hissed its brakes. The world moved forward, as it always does. But for a handful of people, something had shifted. At the precinct, new posters had gone up. Community first, listen before you act, train the mind before the badge. Inside the training room, young cadets sat straighter than usual. This time, the guest speaker wasn't a decorated officer. It was Leon Carter. He stood at the front of the room, not in uniform, not with authority borrowed from a badge, but with something harder to earn. Lived truth. He didn't lecture, he told stories, of silence mistaken for threat, of calm mistaken for guilt, of identity mistaken for danger. And they listened. Because when truth speaks without anger but with weight, it leaves no room for denial. A few blocks away, Rick Dalton sat alone on a bench, ironically not far from where everything began. No cuffs, no orders, just him, his thoughts, and the sound of children playing somewhere nearby. He didn't know what came next. He wasn't even sure who he was outside the badge, but for the first time in his career he was willing to ask, and to listen. Sometimes, change doesn't come with sirens or headlines. Sometimes, it begins with someone staying seated when they could have walked away, with someone speaking when silence was easier, or with someone looking in the mirror and not looking away. The system hadn't been fixed, not yet, but it had been cracked open, and that crack let light in.